Well, I want to talk a little bit about emotional first aid. I've done a little bit of training. Sharon's pretty well trained in critical incident stress management, helping people process crisis, helping people sort of mitigate and understand and deal with the things that they've seen in times of trauma. And a group I used to work with says it this way: if you'll give me an hour now, I can save you years of therapy on the back end. It really is a true thing, because one of the most important things, and this is important for us to understand, not just for the people that we're dealing with, say if we're responding to a community that's been exposed to trauma that's outside of our own, but also for ourselves, for our team members who are experiencing a secondary trauma. You know, because talking to people who've gone through these heartaches and these hard, amazing things over and over again starts to affect you as well. And so there's some things that we can do that can make a huge difference. And really, it comes down to this: if we give somebody an opportunity to tell their story, and sum it up that way would be my 5-second answer of what is critical incident stress management, is listening to somebody tell their story. And that's why opening yourself up, active listening, you know, where you're engaged with somebody, you're looking, you're giving feedback, you're acknowledging, you're, you know, kind of repeating back to them what they're saying. So I hear you're saying this horrible thing happened to you. Can do so many wonderful things to help them process. It can really, we call it emotional first aid, but it really can make a huge difference in the long run for people's ability to process what happened to them. Like Pam was saying, the mind can't process some things that are so traumatic. People will just truly forget that it actually happened, or not be able to process, acknowledge that it really did happen. And so it sounds like a simple thing, but really just sitting down with somebody, they call it the ministry of presence, and just giving them an opportunity to share is incredible. It's incredible. And to posture your heart with love. Hey, I really want to hear what happened to you, and give you an opportunity to tell me what happened, is such a powerful ministry. And you may not be somebody who can go and do the physical first aid. You can't, if blood and guts and broken bones makes you queasy, you can't process it, that's okay. You still have a piece. The emotional first aid is just as important. It really is. I mean, it really, really is. And just spending 10 minutes with somebody, helping them process a trauma, can make years of difference on the back end. It doesn't seem like a powerful ministry, but it really is. Just going, oh gosh, what was that like? Can you tell me about that? You know, and giving people that chance to open up, you'll hear incredible stories. You'll hear, just incredible stories. We'll get into that in a second. Also brings me to another point, and this is actually for helping your team process what they're doing and avoiding that secondary trauma, is called debriefing. And this is something I've seen a lot of groups miss out on when they do their crisis response ministry. Giving your team a chance to talk about what they saw that day. It's as simple as that. You've got people who are out meeting the needs, and you'll remember this, going through, and even in a tornado setting, and helping people clean up their yards, and giving them some groceries, things like that. Your team that's doing that, they need to talk about it at the end of the day. And a debriefing is not a time for you to extol your ministry and how wonderful you are. It's a time to sit down and give everyone on your team an opportunity to talk. And I will tell you this, when you find people who don't want to talk, that's a really big indicator that they have something they need to talk about. That's a huge red flag. I don't want to share anything today. Oh, okay. Okay, and you don't force them, but later you go up with some one-on-one time and say, hey, what's going on? Can you talk to me about what happened today? Yeah.
You said you need to be brief to avoid secondary what?
Secondary trauma.
I helped out at Katrina, and we didn't do that. And you carry that weight, the burdens, with you, and sooner or later they have to come out.
That's right.
You know, and so meltdown came as a result of that, and I watched a number of folks, including myself, did that. Then we began to realize we need to talk about this.
Yeah. That's so good. And Tom's exactly right. They will come out, one way or another. They will come out. They'll start to manifest in dreams, loss of sleep, all these things.
I just wanted to mention that there was a fire in Chicago where students had to jump out of the windows in order to survive, and they hadn't seen each other for 20 years. And they got together and they actually debriefed about that incident. And all of them said, you know, I've carried this with me all these years, never was able to resolve it until we all sat down and told the story of how we interfaced with it, because we all experienced it. So the concept is you experience something together, and it's a way to process that. And by telling the story, you're able to verbalize it, because when we're emotionally traumatized, it's exactly what happens. We're emotionally traumatized, so our brain, the left side of our brain shuts down because it's overwhelmed, and we can't express anything until our brain comes back online. Okay? So that's part of why this is so important, to sit down, to talk about what happened. It's something that happened together for us, and you can resolve it as if I'm not alone, I'm not isolated, I don't carry this just by myself. And those are important factors.
That's good.
Part of that's because they can only understand what they went through because they all went through it together. So they can balance off of each other and can get where that other person's coming from.
Yeah, shared experiences. Something I kind of want to touch on, when you're being that role, when you're active listening for somebody, you're helping them to debrief or talk through their experiences. It's really important to never ever diminish their experience. Oh, well, that's not that big of a deal. Or, oh, you should just be grateful that somebody else has had it so much worse. Because your perception of trauma doesn't matter. I've seen people witness horrible things and really not be that adversely affected. And have seen people witness things that wouldn't seem to be that traumatic, but the effect is very real. And I'm telling you guys that sometimes, and I'll just use my experience in Kurdistan with taking some 20-year-old kids from YWAM into these refugee camps, the things that would impact them would be things that you wouldn't think meant that much. And so when you do your debriefs and you give everybody a chance to talk, it's really important that you create a safe environment where everybody gets an opportunity to speak and nobody's allowed to railroad over them or interject or share their story. When it's your turn to talk, it's your turn to talk, and the whole room will honor that. That's a safe environment where you could say, yeah, this thing where that guy, I saw him say something mean to his wife, and that really upset me. Now other people are going, oh, what's the big deal? You know, I saw this kid who had burns all over their legs. That's real trauma. Hey, for whatever reason, that was the traumatic experience for that person that day. And so, but I'm telling you, giving people a place to share in a safe environment can do wonders for the overall health of your team. Because remember, in the last exercise we did, we talked about 24 hours in, 3 weeks in, months in. If you're responding, sometimes your team may be responding for a long time. And so being able to respond well and creating this community, this safe place is one of the most important things we can do to keep people healthy and whole, not just physically, but emotionally. People develop compassion fatigue. They get tired of doing this same, and even being the people that sit down and, let me try to frame it. Going in after the tornado, there's a lot of trees to be cut down. There's a lot of yards to be cleaned up, right? There's all over the neighborhood, or this big earthquake scenario. Imagine the level of work, the physical work that has to be done. And it's really easy to see and value the work of the physical work that people are doing. But there's also people who are just going in and sitting down with people and say, tell me your story. Tell me your story. Tell me your story. And day after day, they're hearing these heartbreaking, heart-wrenching stories. It's traumatic.
When we were in Oklahoma, and we had gone to his house, and we went to many houses, and there was a man there, and we started, we asked if we could help him, and we began to help him. And he told us that his family was someplace else. Okay, we understand. It was his third tornado. It was the third time he lost a house.
Wow.
we began to help him. His resources were limited. They'd already been through this twice with not adequate resources. He stayed so people didn't steal everything he has. He literally was sleeping on wet, rain-soaked bedding because he couldn't leave. He had to protect what was his. And it was like, we talked to him and then we prayed for him. And I mean, the fortitude of a man staying in a house where he was vulnerable. But it's what he had, and he had to, it was unbelievable. It was like, oh my gosh. And so you shoveled stuff because just, many hands make light work. And you don't know their stories until you ask, until you get beyond the physical. I mean, we saw the physical, but then you shared the emotional. This was the third tornado.
I think for the team members, that's important to understand too, because most of us don't live lives without trauma, without some measure of trauma. And so we bring that with us to that event. And there may be a similar situation where we associate the emotion of our trauma from then to this one now. And it may resurrect that feeling.
That's right. Trigger and bring things
Trigger,
back.
yeah.
That's really good. That's really true. Yeah. And it's like Pam said, your heart's intention, people will feel it before. It's not the words that you use, and you can't release what you don't have. You're gonna release whatever you are, and so if you're angry, bitter, and suffering trauma yourself, well, you're gonna go and release that into the people you're trying to help. I want to touch on this a little bit before we move on to our last topic. But, what's the good news? Some of the do's and don'ts of what you could say. I got a lot of this from the Billy Graham chaplaincy program. What not to say, what's okay to say. Some of these things you've heard a lot of people say, and it's really important to kind of train yourself because, I know how you feel. Yeah, I know how you feel. I don't care what your situation was, how close it may resemble theirs. You don't truly know how they feel. You may have suffered a very similar loss, but you don't know exactly, and so it's just not something they want to hear. God uses all things together for good. Woo! Just because something is truth, a biblical truth, doesn't mean it's appropriate to share. Doesn't mean it's the good news of the kingdom. And I heard, I think it was Roy Godwin say this, if you come to a woman who's a single mom and she's having a hard time, she can't afford to pay her bills, she's working 3 jobs, she's raising 3 kids, and you come up and you preach to her that she's a sinner and going to hell, well, even if it's objective truth, it's not the good news of the kingdom, is it? And so, what's the good news for this situation? And sometimes it's not an easy answer, and that's our nature, is we kind of want to find that simple answer. What's going to make you feel better? What's the bright side? What's the silver lining? And that's not always what people want to hear. They just need somebody to listen to them. I heard a woman tell a story in Moore, Oklahoma. I talked to this woman, and after a while she began to unfold and tell me her story. She had gone to one of the schools that had collapsed, and the elementary schools, and she got there just in time, and she was... grabbed her son and was holding him, and she showed me how the hole in her arm where the wall had collapsed on her and where her son's head would have been. And so she was there, praise God, and she took the brunt of the collapse and it saved her son's life. Well, that sounds like a good thing, and it was, but that's not what she wanted to focus on. She was still having a really hard time because she had been so focused on her son. She'd been denying that she had suffered the loss, that she had gone through a traumatic experience. And so I'm thinking, well, that's great news, praise God. But she wasn't ready to be praise God. She was, even the sound of the generators makes me hear that tornado over again. And she was constantly reliving her trauma. And so the neat and tidy solution often just makes us feel better. And so just really active listening. That's really the one thing. If you could take one thing away for emotional health, active listening. If you give a chance for somebody to really talk, don't share your story. They don't need to hear about your experience. Let them talk about their experience. I understand. Time heals all wounds. None of those things do they want to hear. Some good questions though. What was it like? How are you holding up? I can't imagine how difficult it is for you. May I pray for you? Those are good things. Do you have family nearby? You know, and some people may not want to talk about God, but you can say things like this. Well, knowing how important faith is in a time like this, would you like to talk about your faith?
That's good.
And it gives you sometimes that open door to talk about things. And, let people be angry with God when they're going through a trauma. God's big enough; He can take it. You don't have to argue them out of it. You know, you can let them express their emotions. Make sense?
Yeah. It's good.
So I guess if I could really sum up some of the things I thought we really would take away from today, or hope that we would take away today, is the importance of community. We are made in God's image, and God is in community with Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and with us. That's the image in which we're created. It's like the 1 Corinthians 12. We're made to be our function in the body, with Christ as the head, and we each serve our role. We're designed to be in community together. And it's a glorious thing. It's glorious that we have weaknesses and we can't do it on our own. Like Sharon said, when we try to do it all on our own or feel responsible to do it all, it's overwhelming. It's funny, I was feeling that when we started today. I was anxious. I was like, oh my gosh, what about this and what about that? How is this all going to fit together? And Sharon was praying for me before she started, and she blessed me to do my part. Yeah, we each have a part to play. And it's glorious that we're limited and we can't do it all on our own, because God's strength is made perfect in our weakness, right? And so when we have to rely on each other, we're a reflection of God. God's in community. That's the image in which we're created. And so when we set our eyes on a community in crisis, what can we do? What can we bring? We can help bring a sense of community to those people. We can help a community come through it stronger on the other side. And I think one of the best tools I have seen for how we could maybe restore a community is local houses of prayer. And so maybe if you guys want to come up now, we can sort of talk about that a little bit. I know there's not a lot of time left, but again, today's